Ānuenue Ele'Ele. Simon was standing right on the intersection of Fort Street and South King Street, just like Stella instructed him to. He was standing under a sign labeled Benson Smiths & Co., just watching the many people buzz past him. Hawaii was a lot more full than Simon would have originally thought. People whizzed past him, almost as if Simon was just an object standing in their way. It was a little mesmerizing, watching all the faces blur together. It made it a little hard to focus. He was supposed to be looking for Stella. 10 minutes had passed. Simon scratched the back of his wrist. Did he get the time right? Was he too early? 20 minutes. Was this a trick? Had he been right the night before? Was this all just an elaborate prank to humiliate him? Simon thumbed his suitcase in his hand. He could have easily just left it in the hotel room he stayed at last night, but he didn't want his things to be stolen. That's foolish, he thought. Who the hell would steal an old hat? Simon sighed to himself. His heart ached with a sense of disappointment. He was about to give up hope in finding Stella, until comforting curls underneath a woven hat cut through the crowd. "Stella!" Simon exclaimed just a bit too loudly. "Simon!" she returned the sentiment. "I'm happy to see you showed. I was afraid I may have scared you off." Simon nervously giggled. He wasn't entirely sure what to say to that. He took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing thoughts. A smile appeared across his face as he watched Stella speak to him. Oh, wait, he was supposed to be paying attention, wasn't he? Simon silently cursed to himself. And then I was thinking of going to Honolulu Harbor. How does that sound? Oh, yes, that sounds good. Stella raised her eyebrows a bit, giving Simon a playfully annoyed face. You weren't listening at all, were you? I... Stella giggled. You're so silly, Mr. Minor. Mr. Minor? Simon never heard of himself being referred to in such a way. Come on, I know a great place we can go to first, Stella said as she led Simon down the sidewalk. They weaved past many buzzing people, but it wasn't long before they reached their destination. Simon thought that they didn't even leave the street corner. He looked up at the sign Stella stopped at. Hats and things. Hat shop? Simon read the sign, confused. Yes, silly, you can't expect your old hat to last forever, right? He supposed that was true. It would be nice to update his style a little bit. Simon and Stella looked around, fawning over all the options. Stella picked up a straw hat almost identical to the one she was wearing, and gave it an awful amount of consideration before putting it back. Simon, on the other hand, was looking more in the darker hats, made by velvet instead. A brown bowler hat caught his eye, and he tried it on. What do you think of this, Miss Stella? She giggled. Perfect, Mr. Minor. One purchase later, and Simon walked out of the store with a snazzy new hat. Even something as small as a hat gave him a confidence boost. Stella smiled at his bright face. So, have you ever had a Coca-Cola before? Simon shook his head. What is it? Oh, it's only the most amazing pop in Hawaii, she exclaimed. You've got to try it now. Simon nodded and followed Stella to a pop shop. It was exciting, trying so many things in one day. They sat on the diner stools and waited for their drinks. Simon admired Stella under the bright glowing lights of the shop. She looked wonderful in the light. Any light. Simon was so distracted he barely noticed the bottle being placed beside him. You try yours first. I want to see what you think of it. Simon hesitantly took it and raised it up to his lips. He had never recalled drinking any pop before, let alone this brand. Well, it turns out that was a mistake. The sudden sensation of carbonation burned inside of his cheeks, causing him to reflexively spit it out all over himself. He held his hand over his mouth, trying to squeak out a muffled apology, but to his surprise, Stella burst out laughing. She laughed and laughed as the other patrons looked at them with disgust. Stella snorted so hard, Simon was afraid she would fall off the stool. Is it too much for you, French man? She teased, and Simon started laughing right there with her. 10 minutes later, after Simon shoddily tried wiping up his now sticky coat, they continued walking down the street. Simon couldn't help but to have this dumb smile glued to his face. Spending time with this woman, who was still practically a stranger, was the best time of his life so far. I have the perfect idea of what to do next. The tone of her voice made it seem like she was being sarcastic, but Simon didn't doubt that it would at least be entertaining. "Here it is," Stella excitedly announced, raising her arms up to gesture to the big sign overhead. "Princess Theater." "It's a movie theater?" "Yeah, this movie just came out," she explained. "Would you like to see it with me?" "Oh," Simon's lips upturned into a smile. "Of course I'll see it with you." Stella returned the smile and walked him up to the ticket stand. They were getting tickets for a movie called The Male Animal. Simon didn't bother to question what it was about, but it certainly sounded interesting. "Hello," Stella said to the worker in the ticket booth. "2 tickets, please." The man reached for them while Stella was pulling out some bills from her purse. "Wait," Simon interrupted. Stella froze midway through getting the money out, waiting for Simon to elaborate. "Please, allow me." Stella laughed at his sudden chivalry and gestured for Simon to pay at the booth. He fumbled with coins and bills for a moment before sliding the cash over the counter. The man handed them 2 tickets and they started to walk inside the building. Simon glanced down at Stella's hand as they walked. He wanted to hold it. But Simon shook his head, feeling as though it was too early to make such a gesture. He sauntered beside her, finding a couple seats close to the screen. The bright lights of the projector almost stung Simon's eyes as it lit up the room. Now that he was thinking about it, he realized he hadn't seen a movie in the theaters in a long time. Perhaps a bit too long. As they were waiting for the movie to start, other people began to funnel into the theater. Simon suddenly felt uncomfortable as a stranger sat next to him. His stomach began churning as he tried to ignore the new presence. Eventually, as more people were seated, the movie began to play. Stella seemed to be fully invested, but Simon could barely bring himself to pay attention. He tried to take a deep breath to calm himself down, but he quickly found that it was hard to breathe. Putain de merde, what am I so worked up over? He darted his eyes at the stranger sitting next to him before looking away. "It's only a couple hours. I can manage, right?" "Easier said than done, isn't it?" Simon took a shaky breath as he tried to enjoy the movie with Stella. His thoughts began to go back and forth as he found he couldn't focus on it whatsoever. "What is the matter? You can spend hours with a mystery woman only to get bothered by someone sitting next to you?" "She's different," he replied to his own thoughts. "I don't know why, she just is." She just is? Simon realized how that didn't make sense. He tried to justify it regardless. "Stella has been my first brush with kindness in all my life. No one has treated me this way before." "That is only because she doesn't know you. Just wait until..." His ever-racing mind was suddenly interrupted by a warm sensation on his hand. Simon looked down to see that Stella was holding it, absent-mindedly. All at once, the sound of the movie became clearer, and his vision came back into focus. Simon let out a tiny chuckle as his cheeks flushed. Although Simon sort of missed the first part of the movie at this point, he still made an effort to watch the rest. Eventually, it came to a finale, and the couple walked out together. Simon noted that it was sprinkling out. Not bad enough to have to use an umbrella, but it was raining nonetheless. "Wow!" Stella shouted. "That movie was terrible!" "Yeah, it was," Simon laughed. Stella looked up into the sky and saw that it was late afternoon. "Would you still like to go to the harbor with me?" "Of course, I would love to," Simon said with no doubt in his mind. Stella began walking, and Simon tagged closely behind. He was honestly grateful to have met a local so quickly. Although he and Stella have only known each other for about a day, he didn't like to think what it would be like without her here. Simon changed from walking behind her to walking beside her. He was still thinking about her soft hand around his. She held my hand. Does she care about me? He clinged on to that thought for a moment. I want to care too. Simon held his breath and gently grasped Stella's hand. She looked up, a bit surprised at the sudden touch. Simon looked down at the walkway below them, suddenly too nervous to look at her. There were a few moments of silence before Stella giggled and held onto his hand tighter. A bit of time later, they arrived at the harbor and sat down at one of the docks. Simon looked down into the water, unsure of what to say. Stella and Simon just enjoyed each other's company as the afternoon fell into dusk. It wasn't a bad silence, but a pleasant one. The lack of noise aside from the crashing waves actually soothed Simon. It reminded him of his childhood, where he would go sit on his father's boat watching the ships sail away under the sun. By God, did he miss that? He missed it every single day, but maybe this was going to prove itself to be better. Simon, look! Stella excitedly pointed to the sky. Simon whipped his head up and looked at where she was pointing. A rainbow shone through the nighttime rain. Somehow, through some miracle, the growing moon raised enough light for a rainbow to form. Simon was in awe. He had heard about it, but he had never seen one in person before. Do you know what my mother used to call that? Stella started. Ānuenue Ele'Ele. Black rainbow, Simon softly spoke to himself. He hadn't quite known how he was able to understand that phrase so quickly. Simon didn't really know any Hawaiian words, aside from aloha, of course. Stella stayed silent for a moment, looking off at it. Ula, ula, alane, mele, mele. Stella hummed quietly, almost in a whisper. Oh, it's nothing, just... Stella pulled her legs closer to her chest. Me and my mother used to recite the colors of the rainbow whenever one would show up. That's how she taught me my colors as a child. Simon leaned in a bit closer to her. Will you teach me? Stella was taken aback a little bit. She wouldn't have guessed that a tourist would be so interested in the language. Of course. She turned her body fully toward Simon. First is ula ula, which means the color red. Simon nodded at her. All right, the next one is alane. That is the color orange. Then you have mele mele, which is yellow. Ula ula, alane, mele mele, Simon repeated after her. Stella smiled at him. The next one is oma oma o. That one means green. Then there's polu for blue, and finally poni for purple. Oma oma o, polu, poni, he recited again. She looked at him with a sense of gratefulness in her eyes. They almost reflected the rainbow from the night sky, making her pupils glow in such an abstract way. You're good at this, Stella chuckled. I wish other tourists were just as caring as you. Simon inched ever closer to her. What do you mean by that? It's just, she sighed. People usually come here expecting hula skirts or those coconut bras. Stella met eyes with him for a moment. I'm just glad you're different. I would never have expected that from this wondrous place. Stella clicked her tongue. How are you this understanding, Mr. Miner? Simon didn't know why, but he felt heat rush to his face as the words fell off Stella's lips. The tone she had previously said it in felt different from this time, more intimate. Well, my mother's from Hawaii. She never wore any of those ludicrous items. Simon shyly turned away from her. She's the entire reason why I came here, honestly. Are you visiting her? No, Simon nervously scratched his wrist. She's, dead. He winced at himself at that final addition to his statement. Simon really didn't mean for it to come out that suddenly. It just sort of happened. He peeked at Stella through his squeezed eyelids, waiting for a response. Oh, Stella held her hand over her mouth and muttered quietly. You poor thing. It was a long time ago. He scratched his wrist again. But she's still gone. There was another moment of silence between them, not calming this time, but tense. Simon stared off into the water, not sure how to respond. What was her name? Simon slowly lifted his head up. Kailani, he sighed. Stella whispered the name to herself, processing it. Such a lovely name. It means heaven in our local language. Simon smiled to himself, still looking away. That's nice. Simon could tell that Stella was looking at him out of the corner of his eye. He thought about his mother. He never actually met her. He'd only seen her in old photographs and paintings. He had always thought that the black and white nature of the photos never did his mother any justice. It was hard to know what Kailani actually looked like. Pierre never talked about her, despite having 2.5 decades passed by now. But now that Simon had spent time with Stella, he imagined his mother would look a lot like her. So, she started, if you're not here visiting anyone, why did you come? Simon sighed. It's complicated. Stella made eye contact with him, enticing him to elaborate. He tried to find his words deep in his stomach. I felt as though I needed a break from my home. There were many options I could have chosen, but I chose this place. I can't fully explain it. It felt like fate decided for me. Simon straightened his back and continued. I thought of my mother. I thought of her place of origin, and I wanted to... He trailed off. Stella held Simon's hand in hers. I wanted to feel closer to her, he finished. Maybe being here, I could get to know her in a way I never could. Simon, her comforting voice cut through his thoughts. They both sat in silence. Simon took a deep breath and held Stella's hand tighter. He felt like an infant being cradled. He longed for that sense of comfort, the sense of warmth as he was shivering in the cold. Simon, she repeated. Simon darted his eyes in Stella's direction, only for a moment. Yes? Stella put her hand behind her head, nipping at the small hairs that strung there. Simon felt a weird chill along his spine, as he could tell she was getting just as nervous as him. Stella seemed to be thinking, every once in a while shooting small glances at Simon, which made him feel even more anxious. I bet it gets lonely, huh? She finally spoke. Staying here with no family. Simon silently nodded in agreement. Would you like to, Stella stopped for a few seconds before continuing. Would you like to stay with me? Simon was too stunned to speak. He just sat there in shock, hoping what he just heard wasn't his mind playing tricks on him. Stella laughed and stood up, stepping over to where Simon was sitting. She extended her hand and waited for Simon to grab it. His hand shook as he took hers in his. Simon was awestruck, but was secretly jittering with excitement. He didn't know why, but he put great trust in Stella, and it seemed that she also did to him. Stella led Simon once again until they stood on the walkway of a quaint little condo. It was definitely way smaller than what Simon was used to, but he already felt at home the second he stepped inside. There was a warm feeling surrounding him. It was like he was wrapped up in a blanket. Stella gestured over to her sofa and asked if Simon was all right with sleeping there. He eagerly said yes. Already being tired from their day out, Stella wished him a pleasant sleep and slipped off into her bedroom. Simon looked up at her ceiling, thinking about all of this. It was definitely a nice surprise meeting her and all, but he never expected to be staying in her house. It was a nice change from his previous home. Back in America, people would avoid him just for being him. Everyone knew him, definitely not in the way he wanted to be known. Simon squinched his eyes as he tried to get rid of those horrible memories. But on the other hand, Stella was a welcome change to his life. He appreciated her company in a way he couldn't describe. It was just warm. Simon closed his eyes and allowed himself to drift off into sleep, waiting with bated breath for the new morning.